So first things first, I wanted to explain the format that's going to be happening for Duels of Runeterra 17 this weekend because it's a little bit different, it's a lot different, and nobody that I've talked to actually understands what's going on. So I'm going to sit you down and run you through this so that when you enter this tournament, you know what you're getting into and what kind of deck list you should be submitting. So the gist of it is that Duels of Runeterra is trying to mock the Riot seasonal tournament format that's happening in mid-December so that you have a little bit of experience going into that. And what that means is that we are going to be doing 5 rounds of Swiss followed by top cut. Regardless of how many people entered, the amount of entrants is going to determine what the top cut is, be it top 4, top 8, top 16, something like that. So the actual format of the tournament is going to be pretty similar to the gauntlet that they ran, where it's not quite region lock, it's not quite unified. Instead, you do get to bring 3 decks, and the only restrictions are you are only allowed 1 championless deck for whatever reason. It's not relevant this weekend. I'm curious if that'll ever be relevant. But the big one is that you are not allowed to repeat regional combinations or champions. And what that means is that you can bring 3 Shadow Isle decks, you just can't bring 2 Shadow Isle Freljord decks, and you're not allowed to play Elise in more than one of those decks. So if what I said just went completely over your head, let me go ahead and give you a visual example. So this is something, a lineup that I could bring. Let's say that I'm bringing War Mother's Call with Trundle and Tryndamere, Feel the Rush with Teemo Sejuani, and then Frostbite midrange. And as you can see, Ash is the picture because I had to cut Sejuani from my deck, because while I am allowed to play 3 Freljord decks, and I could even play, it is worth noting, this is not unified, meaning that I could run like Harsh Winds in all 3 of these decks, I could run Avalanche in all 3 of these decks. What I cannot do is run Sejuani in more than one of these decks. I can't run Trundle in multiples of these decks. So I hope that helps sort of help you visualize it if you were a little bit confused about it, because it is pretty different from any other tournament that we've run so far here at Duels of Runeterra. I'm saying here like I'm affiliated with them, I'm a freelance caster, they just get me every week. But yeah, 3 Freljord decks, I'm not allowed to play Sejuani twice, and I couldn't play like Freljord Shadow Isle and then Freljord Shadow Isle, even if it was like War Mothers and Endure Spiders, even though there's no overlapping cards or champions, so that's a big no-no. So yeah, hope that helps. Now, I don't think I'm going to let that specifically influence the tier list, but it is what I'm going to focus on when I get to the lineup section a little bit later on. Now, I'm not going to lie, this tier list is a bit of a mess. I've actually had to scrap all of the sample deck lists just because they were pretty old, so depending on when you see this video, the sample deck list might be filled and they might not, because as always, the link to this tier list is going to be in the description of the video, and I update it every Friday while I do these tournament tacticians. So, things have gotten shuffled around a little bit. Obviously, there were nerfs to Swain and, well, not Swain specifically, but Make It Rain and Lee Sin, which pretty much targeted the Twisted Fate Swain deck. Pirate aggro got a little hurt by it, but not really, because one, they run Misfortune, and any Misfortune deck is inherently going to get touched by a nerf to her champion spell. But Pirate aggro had originally run Make It Rain, Decimate, Noxian Fervor as the only spells in the deck. Then they cut Make It Rain for a while, and then they put it back in, and all they're really going to have to do here is revert to the versions where they cut it, so they're not too hurt by it. It also gave Discard aggro a big boost because it is a very wide aggro deck, plays a lot of 1 health units, and the prevalence of Make It Rain in the format was something that was really hurting that, and I think it's one of the reasons that Pirate aggro actually started to run the card again, because Discard aggro was sort of picking up in popularity, things like that. Then you take those nerfs and on top of it you throw in the release of the new KDA cards, and that's where I kind of had to make a weird compromise on the tier list, because only Feel the Rush is going to be legal for the upcoming Duels of Runeterra this weekend, strictly because it's the first card on the pass, and they didn't want to make it unfair that some people didn't have time to grind for cards that are later down the pass, because I believe the latest one is locked behind 180 of the KDA points, so it makes sense. You know, Feel the Rush is probably one of the more meta-defining ones anyway, so people at least get to experiment with that, and I actually did put it up in tier 1, which I'll get into in a second here. So obviously, like, War Mothers didn't get touched, TLC essentially the same deck, Feel the Rush arguably essentially the same deck as well, in the fact that they are all Freljord Shadow Isle control decks with a long-term win condition. Those are all still extremely viable decks, extremely good decks in the format. Pirate aggro I still think is going to be tier 1. Discard aggro actually got bumped up due to the fall off of Make It Rain. I think Twisted Fate Swain is going to fall down to tier 2, because unlike Pirate aggro, who can just cut the card, it was pretty integral to TF Swain, who was running a lot of keg generation, who really needed that extra tool to deal with some aggro decks, to have some Swain activators, to get the Swain leveled, things of that nature. And I do think that TF Swain is going to suffer, but I don't think it's necessarily out of contention. Which leads me into a little segue. I've been doing this for a little over 6 months, as you can tell by the week count on the Tournament Tactician video that you're watching watching, you know, this is a weekly series, so I believe I started doing the series when the game released, but of course I've been following the tournament scene since before that because I'm a caster. And I take a lot of pride in the work that I do as an analyst. I think that I get a lot more right than I get wrong, and I want to tell you guys I'm not confident in the analysis that I'm presenting to you this week. Not only is it a totally different format, but on top of that, the KDA cards being pushed in, as well as two of the more prevalent decks in the format receiving not deck killing nerfs, but impactful nerfs nonetheless, leaves a lot of question marks up in the air for me, especially going into this different kind of format. So bear with me on that one. Just know that like this is one of those weeks where I am really not 100% on what I'm putting out there, but I do want to give you the analysis that I can and sort of talk you through my thought process at the very least, so that if you do disagree with me, you know where you disagree with me and you can make an informed decision for yourself and be like, okay, well, you know, I agreed with 50% of what Boulevard said, and then the 50% that I didn't agree with, I can tweak towards what I think things are going to be like, and I really just want to see you succeed in a tournament. So I'm going to give you as much information as I can to help you do that, and if you think some of it's wrong, by all means, throw it out the window and do your own thing in those areas. So first things first, I think that Lee Sin and TF Swain are going to fall off pretty hard. I put them down in tier 2 because they are still relatively powerful decks. This leaves Nightfall in a weird spot because Nightfall is a card that we specifically see in tournaments, usually to pick on Lee Sin lineups. It doesn't do super well at picking on decks like War Mother's Call, just because it does have Avalanche, and Avalanche is going to be one of the premier cards of the weekend. I think when you talk about having overlapping regions, Avalanche and Withering Wail are two of the cards that are just going to have big splashes, and it is a little bit weird for me to put Discard Aggro in tier 1 because of that, but I don't know how much people are going to pick up on that. It's one of those like step laddering tiers of thinking where it's like, okay, well, if A is true then B is true then C, and I don't know how many people are getting caught up on step B. It would be different if it was region locked. I had like the whole region locked meta down pat, and of course then they throw it into a different format. So we deal with what we got. But what I want to touch on now is Starspring in tier 1, because I had this in tier 3 last weekend. So now that I've gotten to play with the deck a little bit more, see it in action a little bit more, I feel like it had a good matchup against the Fairly Red Shadow Isle decks. And I say had because Feel the Rush is a bit of a question mark for me. Generally against War Mother's Call, you know, they're only putting out one unit in turn. All you have to do is like hush the Overwhelm unit or block it with whatever has 10 HP off of your Astral Protection, and you're kind of chilling. When they're getting out two large units, specifically Tryndamere and Trundle, and then you still have Hush, and generally you want to try and Hush to kill that Tryndamere, but, you know, there's a decent chance that the Trundle is going to have, you know, 14, 15 attack points because it's alongside a Tryndamere. It's got the Pillar in hand. Maybe you already had another Trundle on field with a Pillar in hand, and then got another Field of Rush in hand or something. The Trundles can get very big. So quick segue, I guess, sort of the difference between War Mothers and Field of Rush is that Field of Rush is a little bit more all-in, but it's also more immediate. War Mothers gets to play the long game. Field of Rush says, you know, throw out my Trundle Tryndamere. If you answer them, then yeah, sure, I lost my 12 card value or my 12 mana value, whatever. And it's a very difficult thing to deal with, which is why the card is so good, because Tryndamere is undying, because it is the same entity as the level Tryndamere. It will retain those buffs and be either an 11-11 or an 11-15. I don't think it makes too much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. But if, like, you Feel the Rush and I respond with a Feel the Rush, then we are at a bit of an awkward stalemate, and that's the situation where War Mothers is going to feel a little bit better. So I am curious to see which one actually comes out bigger on the weekend, because as I had mentioned, Feel the Rush is the legal KDA card going into the weekend because it's the first one on the pass. Overall, I think Feel the Rush might be a little bit more popular now that I've seen it in action, and I don't know how Starspring is going to fare into that. I think it does do significantly worse against that than it does against War Mothers, but you do still get one ban, so if you want to take that deck out, by all means, you're still in a good spot, because I think that the two decks that had good matchups against Starspring were the Lee Sin and were the Twisted Fate Swain, especially because Twisted Fate Swain was sort of the one deck that was main decking this landmark removal, and that wasn't even what I thought gave it a good matchup. It was just the rest of the tools available to the deck. But now with TF Swain falling off, because of the Make It Rain falling off, I think that Starspring actually has a really good shot at being a tier 1 deck. I just don't know how much it fits into a tournament lineup with this much regional freedom. So take that as you will. Basically what I'm saying is Starspring is good, but I don't think it's going to be popular, and I think it has a bad Field of Rush matchup, but I think it has a good War Mothers matchup. So I think it has a good matchup against most things in the meta except Field of Rush, so I would still think it's like a very solid deck because you do get that one ban. My concern would be with Teemo Sejuani sort of memeing its way back into presence. I don't know how meme I want to call it, because, you know, a 10-10 Elusive and a 10-10 Overwhelm coming out are pretty scary, as well as if you want to play a long game, then I do just have that forefront Teemo plan of just shrooming up your deck, especially with things like Puffcap Peddler. And if you want to play a long game, like if you're playing Targon Lee Sin, you need to draw a lot of cards to win the game. And if I'm actually like getting a Teemo down turn 1, that is an issue for you, Mimi or not. So the whole point of this basically is you can bring multiple Field of Rush decks because this isn't unified and this isn't region locked. You know, you can't repeat champions over it, but if I'm playing Trundle Tryndamere and then I'm playing Teemo Sejuani, I'm sneaking a Field of Rush deck into that lineup. And, you know, it's fine for you to target out that third deck and pick on that specifically, but if it's another Field of Rush deck, like if I'm just bringing 3 Field of Rush decks, that's going to be a little bit awkward. And I think that that is realistic in the format that Riot has presented because you do get access to Avalanche in every single Field of Rush deck. You know, you do have chances to beat aggro, you just have to diversify the regions that you're pairing with it. So PZ and Freljord, Shadow Isle and Freljord, and then honestly I haven't put too much thought into what the last one would be. But I think it's actually relatively reasonable to not overlap on the champions that you're bringing out in these multiple Field of Rush decks. But that's enough about Field of Rush for right now. In Tier 2, we have sort of the good but not great decks. All of these are tournament viable. You could win a tournament with any of these in your lineup. There's a lot of personalization that's going to come out this weekend, and honestly, I've got a lot of question marks on what your standard lineup is going to look like. I can tell you that there will be a Freljord Shadow Isle deck in it. There might even be multiple Shadow Isle or multiple Freljord decks. So I do think that in region locked right now, aggro is absolutely great. It's probably one of the best lineups that you could bring. In this format, I'm not so sure that's the case because Avalanche and Withering Wail are going to be so prevalent. Bilgewater is going to be a little bit more off the table, and I think that's a space where aggro had a little bit more agency because they do play this late game Riptide Rex stuff. You know, TF Swain, it didn't have a great aggro matchup. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Like, I don't think it was necessarily favored because it is a deck with no healing, but, you know, going into this weekend, I would say that aggro is probably not the direction that you want to be going, even though it is really tempting to play Pirate, Discard, and Nightfall all in the same lineup. You know, Lee Sin's not there to pick on, and I don't think those decks did as good a job picking on War Mothers or War Mothers-like decks. Frostbite midrange is like probably what would round out a triple Freljord lineup, but I don't think anybody's actually inclined to go a triple Freljord lineup just to meme on it, especially because you'd probably be overlapping on Sejuani somewhere else, as I had mentioned. Like in the example lineup that I had Teemo Sejuani in there. And obviously that's not on the tier list because I don't actually know how memey versus how good that deck is because I've seen wildly different builds for it. And, you know, maybe it will pop up this weekend. Will it pop up to success? It's a great question. I don't actually know on that one because I don't have a frame of reference for the matchups that the deck has. But, you know, kind of continuing on down tier 2, we've got some usual players. And then in tier 3 are just some decks that have seen tournament play but have really fallen off. Nab, unfortunately, fell down to tier 3 alongside DoR just because the Make It Rain nerf was really big for Nab and it didn't sort of have the backup power that Twisted Fate Swain had. This is normally the part where I would go to lineups, but as I had mentioned, I really can't predict the kind of lineups that people are going to be bringing just because there is way too much personalization. What I do think you're going to see is a lot of Shadow Isle and a lot of Freljord, you know, sort of spread up however they may be. I think those are sort of the two power regions that we're looking at right now. And I think that Starspring is a very powerful deck as well, but, you know, I don't know if it's as powerful as some of the Shadow Isle Freljord options that you have available to you. I can tell you that if I were playing this weekend, I would probably be bringing War Mothers or Field of Rush, you know, one of those two decks. Deep, for sure. I think that Deep is a deck that not only am I very comfortable on, but is a great Shadow Isle backup for your non-Freljord Shadow Isle deck. You know, still being able to play Withering Wail, still having those great anti-aggro tools, and still having good matchups into some of the later game decks, you know, sort of draw dependent. And then for my last deck, I would be very inclined to bring Karma Lux. I really want to bring an Ionia deck, just because I think there is going to be a very large presence of these late game Freljord Shadow Isle decks. I don't even think Spooky Karma is necessarily off the table. Like, it's very realistic that I would bring triple Shadow Isle of War Mothers / Field of Rush, Deep, and Spooky Karma, and that, you know, fits the parameters of the tournament structure. There's no champion overlap. There's no dual or doubled up on regional combinations because it's Bilgewater Shadow Isle, Freljord Shadow Isle, and Ionia Shadow Isle. But I definitely think I would want to bring that Ionia deck so that I do have the denies in my lineup somewhere. And, you know, maybe there is merit to bringing 3 Ionia decks so that you never lose to Field of Rush because you have triple deny, but I don't know what your aggro matchup is looking like at that point because you are sort of... you know, I mean, you can repeat Tasty Fey Folk across all of them, but the problem is, you know, you can't repeat champions, and I think Spooky Karma and Karma Lux are two of the bigger Ionia decks at the moment, you know, and as well as Lee Sin, but I wouldn't want to bring Lee Sin into necessarily this Field of Rush matchup just because it wasn't doing phenomenal against War Mothers in the first place. Like, it wasn't a bad matchup for Lee Sin by any means, but it wasn't necessarily as favored as I feel a lot of people thought it was, and that's just based on what I've seen from the deck in tournaments on camera and things like that. Yeah, I actually think that about does it. Let's go to the end screen. So that does it for me this week. I know this one was a lot rantier than usual, not as flashy as some of the other tournament tacticians, but the analysis was there. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that and you can kind of get some takeaways from it and help you round out your lineup and understand what you're walking into a little bit better this weekend. Now on to some personal notes about Boulevard. Number one, my schedule has changed a little bit in my personal life. I just got a new job, so I'm kind of adjusting to that. So that's why content's been a little light as of late. I'm hoping to get more things up. I might actually start streaming again on the days where I feel like I can't put up YouTube videos, because typically the way that I've structured things is if I'm casting, I'm not putting up a video that day, and if I'm not casting, then I try to put up a video. The problem I've been running into lately is that I haven't felt like there's any content that I'm like passionate about making, and I don't want to just like make videos for the sake of making videos to keep my channel analytics up. Otherwise I'd be putting up gameplay videos for you guys, but I don't think that's what I want to be doing. Like, I don't care that much. But on to what I'm going to be doing tonight. So here's my casts for the weekend, because I feel like you guys want to watch me cast, right? Yeah. So tonight at 6 p.m. New York time, I'm going to be doing the Liga de Runeterra at twitch.tv/shitjustworks. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'm going to be watching the World's Finals for League of Legends, followed by at, I believe, 2 p.m. New York time, the North America portion of the first Duels of Runeterra 17, and then on Sunday I will be back at 4 a.m. New York time for the European version of Duels of Runeterra 17, followed by at 2 p.m. again New York time, another North America Duels of Runeterra 17. So jam-packed weekend for me in casting, and I'll be with a Wandering Bard for the EU portion, and then I will be back with Shit Just Works for both of those NA tournaments. So go ahead and come check me out. The links for those will be in the description down below, as well as the schedule, as well as this tournament tier list, which I will try to get some sample deck lists up on as soon as possible. I deleted all the old ones because they were kind of outdated, and it was kind of hard to just like, if I hadn't seen a deck in like 3 weeks, then all of a sudden you've got a deck from like pre-set drop, and it was just kind of messy. So yeah, I'll fill that in as soon as I can. But thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.